Okay, so welcome to Let's Go Live with Gigi Mara. I have with me story coach, dev editor, and book podcaster, Dawn Alexander. Welcome, Dawn.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, that's a mouthful. How many jobs do you have, Dawn?
Well, technically it's just story coach and book editor. The book podcast is no longer going. So we have, I was doing that with Ronnie Loren, and we kind of put it on hiatus for a little bit while we could both work on some other projects.
Well, you can work your other two main jobs?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, just in all my free time. It's fine.
Okay, so tell everybody where they can find you, what your handle is, before we dive into the myriad of questions I have for you.
I am on basically everything as Dawn Alexander Books. My website is dawnalexanderbooks.com. And then I have Dawn's Story Studio, which is where I host all of my classes. And it is dawnalexander.podia, which is PODIA.com.
Okay, well, why don't we start there with your classes, because that is fascinating. I know that you do a lot. So what do those classes entail? What do they cover?
My focus as a dev editor is always story and character. So my classes are like, I have creating characters Build-A-Bear style, or I have one that's called Building a Plot from What You've Got. And it's all about, it's about building a plot, but I kind of latched onto this Lego theme. And so it involves, if you were using Legos, how would you build your plot?
Everybody knows Legos.
Right. And so I have classes on story structure, classes on conflict, pacing, all of that.
Okay, so how did that start, though? Did the developmental editing start first, and then you branched out into the need for courses? Because, you only have so many hours and limited resources, right?
Well, I started with developmental editing. I've been developmental editing for about 5 years, and I was a teacher before that. And so I was a school teacher. I had to resign from teaching because my mom became terminally ill and I was taking care of her. And I was explaining to a published author friend of mine about how I was judging a contest. And I was like, if I could just put my email on the bottom of this and let this author contact me, I could help them. I could fix this for them. And she looked at me, and I will never forget this. She looked at me and went, you know, that's a job, right? Like, people pay for you to do that.
And you're like, come again?
Yeah, I was like, tell me more about how people are going to pay me to read. I am quite interested in this conversation. And so I've been doing the developmental editing. I also do story coaching, where I walk with an author through all levels of editing, story creation, anything they need to get their book going. And then I started looking at, I missed the teaching part of it. And so I started looking at, some people don't need the ongoing story coaching. Maybe they're just starting out, but they really need somebody to show them, like, okay, this is what story structure is, and this is how you structure a scene. But they might not necessarily just reach out to me and be like, hey, let me, book some time with you.
Yeah.
Because I do also do like one-off brainstorming and that kind of thing. Ooh. And so I started putting together the classes. I really enjoy doing the classes live. Usually the classes we do Saturday morning, Zoom meeting. I try to keep it very casual, to where if you want to unmute and pop in and ask me a question, that's great. Mm-hmm. But I also understand that people have kids and families and other things to do on Saturday morning other than hang out with me. And so I started making the recordings and the transcripts and the PowerPoint and all that available on Podia.
Okay, so you've been a developmental editor for 5 years. Prior to that, I think you said I know that you're a high school English teacher, correct?
No, I did not teach English. I was a high school teacher. I actually taught American Sign Language. So I taught hearing students how to sign.
Oh, wow. So you're like bilingual.
Yes, I am.
That's so neat. I think that's fascinating. I always think a mad respect for that, because it's difficult.
I really enjoyed teaching. I taught for 18 years. I loved teaching high school. it just got to the point to where, like I said, I had to resign to take care of my mom. And I'd always said that I needed to get out of high school before my kids got into it, because dealing with 100 and, plus high school kids every day and then coming home to 2 more wasn't my idea of a good time. And the universe listened to that, because my first year developmental editing was my oldest daughter's freshman year in high school. And I was like, okay, so this is how things are supposed to work out. I am out of high school now. And I started off trying to write because I love telling stories, and I always wanted to be a writer when I was younger, but amazingly enough, my parents did not think it was a stable career and wasn't sure that I could make any money at it. I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
So that's why I went into teaching. And so I started off trying to write, but I'm very extroverted. I'm very high communication. I love talking to people. I loved teaching. And I was spending all this time alone with just me and the dog. And it was like, okay, so maybe writing, because writing can get really lonely.
Very.
It's like, okay, maybe writing is not where I want to be right now. Maybe I really do. And that's where the editing came together. And a lot of things just fell into place to where I was talking to the right people. And I was already in writing groups. I already had friends who were authors. And it all just came together from there.
So when did the classes start, though?
That is something for, I think, almost 2 years. Nancy Smay and I had a podcast with Evident Inc. We had Story Strategy Live, and it is still available on YouTube. There was like 60 episodes, and we were having a lot of fun doing that. And then life just gets in the way, and we stopped doing it. And so one of my goals for this year, whenever I sat down, a year ago in December, and was like, okay, what do I want to do? One of my goals was, I was like, I'm going to offer a workshop every month. I'm going to, put together a workshop, do the live classes, put it up on Zoom. And so I have 8 workshops up there. I did decide not to do classes for September or for October, November, and December, because I'm doing some brainstorming type specials and that kind of thing. So because NaNoWriMo is one of my favorite things. And so supporting authors through that, I'm focusing on that a little bit in the next couple of months rather than doing the classes. But the classes are there and available all the time. And then I have 2 courses that I don't have completely put together yet, but that will be coming out next year.
That is so exciting. And I am competing in Nano. I try to do both camps and, Nano because I love it. But I love how you started off by saying, I set goals, because we always think that this thing just goes on in perpetuity, and everybody wants to grow. And so the workshops, and I know it's hard when you partner with someone to have that be sustainable, because you're right, their life, your life, and then trying to find the time. But with the workshops, what are common themes, and how are they different from the courses?
So you see things with, like, my focus is deep POV is one of my, that's one of my things, I guess.
Love it.
And story structure, scene structure, and conflict, stakes, and tension are my superpowers,
Okay,
I guess.
Conflict, what, and tension?
Conflict, stakes, and tension. So what is your character trying to decide? What is on either side of that decision? Because conflict is a choice. You either are going to do this or you're going to do that. And if I do this, X is going to happen. If I do that, Y is going to happen. Those are your stakes. And then why does that matter? And is it good or bad? Which is the lesser of 2 evils? That's where your tension comes from. So those were my main focus. And that's what I've built the classes and the workshops around, is giving examples I use a lot of examples from movies, because it's easier to bring up movies than books, because almost everybody's seen certain movies.
Yeah. And books are very genre specific.
Right. And I don't necessarily focus on any specific genre. Like, I will give examples from romance, I will give examples from thrillers, I'll give examples from fantasy. That way, anybody who needs it, it should be accessible for them.
Yeah, yeah. So do you find though that those are the common things that most writers struggle with too? I know you said that you enjoy those, but what's the most common things that you see? Because I would imagine, regardless of the manuscript or the author, you probably come across the same stuff.
It really depends on what level the author is in their career. With
Ooh.
my new,
Okay,
with my
newbies,
right.
Okay, let's do it.
So newbies, I see a lot of struggle with point of view, because deep point of view can be hard to master sometimes. And so with the newbies, they want to tell you, if you have two people in the scene, they want to tell you, like, this person's thinking that and this person's thinking that, and then we go back over to person 8. You don't get to head hop. There's struggle with point of view there. The other thing I see with new authors is wanting to give me all the backstory at the very beginning, because this is all really important. You have to know all of this right now. No, I don't.
Oh, so information dumping rather
yes.
than weaving it through the story, or even not even putting it in there.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So there's things that the author needs to know that it's going to help you develop that character, and it's going to give you how they're going to react in a certain situation, and it's really going to flesh out that character for you. But I don't need to know that in the first 5 minutes. And so
as the reader,
if you
are you also saying that sometimes the reader just doesn't need to know, period?
Sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's things that you can allude to, but they don't need to know the specifics. So for example, they can know that there is some kind of tension between the main character and their older brother. And that can slowly build throughout. And maybe at the end, we find out where the source of tension is. Or if that's not the main focus of the story, then maybe we just know there is tension there, and you get little drops of information that it had something to do that happened when they were 12, and maybe somebody's French fries were taken, but so you don't have to give me all of that information up front. And I always kind of relate it to the first time you meet somebody.
Oh yeah. You're not going to info dump
right.
on your new day.
You don't meet somebody for the first time and say, hi, I'm Dawn. My eyes are green and my hair is red, and my parents got divorced when I was 6, and that's why I think I'm like this. No, you don't get all of that.
Oh,
hopefully,
that's a good analogy for newbies.
Yes. So it's information you as the author, the new authors, they need that information to create those characters. That doesn't necessarily need to make it in the beginning of your book. And it almost never needs to make it in the very, very opening of your book, because you are trying to draw me in. You are trying to bring me in, get me to sit down with you, let me hear your story, let me want to hang out with your characters. And part of that is create some curiosity. Don't tell me everything in the first 3 pages, because I need some time to get to know them before I want to know why they're acting the way they're acting.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You got to introduce them as they are, because like the story changes, right? The emotional arc and the story arc. And yeah. Okay. So that's a common mistake with newbies. Then we get to like middle. What are middle authors?
Middle authors, I don't see
it. Your books published. What would you say? Or both?
I didn't hear what you said. Say it again.
So your middle authors, is it how many books they published, or is it how many years they've been writing? What would constitute like a middle grade author?
Because books published can be very dependent on external circumstances. I would look at what I would consider a mid-level author. This is different than a mid-list author. That's somebody that involves how many books they've published and their success in the publishing world. But
mid-level.
So a mid-level author that I would think of would be somebody who has spent some time studying the craft, and they know the basics. Like, they're not going to head hop. They know not to dump that whole.
What does that mean?
Head hopping is if we are in a scene and there are head hopping. So you are experiencing the scene through one character at a time, rather than bouncing back and forth between the thoughts of multi-characters. So with mid-level authors, usually they're past that. they start to struggle sometimes with still with deep POV, because there's times that they want to pull back and they want to show you something, and I'm like, this character didn't see that. Like, if
yeah.
I am in this character's head and they are facing the sunset, but behind them there is a seagull, they didn't get to see the seagull flying over. I don't care how well it fits your imagery, the character doesn't see that. So you see a little bit of struggle because they're really trying to get into that deep POV, but there's still a couple of places that they'll slip. And with that comes a little bit of a struggle with the show don't tell. And you hear that all the time.
Yep,
and
all the time.
What telling is instead of writing out this conversation that you and I are having and showing facial expressions and emotions, it would just say, Gigi and Dawn did a Instagram live and it was fun and they had a good time. You have to prove that to me. You have to prove it on the paper. And where you see that with mid-level authors is they will say things like, they had been best friends forever and she knew that she could always depend on the other person. Okay, so show that to me. Or,
oh, that's good, because we do that to not necessarily like advance the story, but you don't want to waste precious words on,
right,
bringing people
right.
to speed. So how would you show not tell, but keep it small or minimal?
So instead of, and you can have a sentence like, they had been best friends since they were in 7th grade. That's fine. But you've got to expand on that, and you can do it in a couple of sentences. You expand on that in that they had been best friends since 7th grade, and if you have a scene where your character is not feeling good, and so the other character comes over and is, cleaning up their house or, laying them on the couch and putting a blanket on them, like you would do for somebody that you care about, even if it's not a romantic relationship. And so there's those little moments that you can show through the dialogue, through their actions.
Okay.
And
I know, I think I have an example, because in my last book that I published, they've been best friends since they were kids. And there was a part when he said, yeah, he, peed through the sheet. He peed on our sleepover. And he was like, man, because he said something like, he pees in his sleep. And the character's like, we were 10 years old, and that was because your mom gave me as many Dr. Peppers as I could have, and I've never had Dr. Pepper allowed in my house. So
yes.
like that.
Yes, so absolutely something like that shows us they're best friends. They have this history together. They know each other well enough to say certain things to each other.
The inside secret. So if you show don't tell, but you don't want to do a whole lot of words, you could do like a little inside secret, which we have in real life.
Right.
And then move the narrative along, or move the story along.
Well, for an example would be, I'm slightly obsessed with the Fast and the Furious franchise. It's like one of my favorite things. I know it is completely out there. It entertains me.
Okay, when they came out with that first one, I'm like, this is going to be the only movie. I mean, seriously, like Cars and Hot Dudes. How long could this? And now they have like, what, 8 or something?
10. It might be 10. And
but you know what I mean? When the franchise comes out, you're like, this is one and done, everybody.
Right. But there is a scene in the very first one to where one of the guys is trying to convince Toretto that Brian is a cop.
Uh-huh.
And he literally says, you don't know this guy. He's a cop. You don't know him. And Vin Diesel, Toretto, looks at him and says, there was a time when I didn't know you. And he says, that was in the 3rd grade. And so instantly we know they've been friends a really long time.
Yeah.
And they trust each other enough to have these conversations. And it's a 4-sentence dialogue. And it gives us all that information right there.
That is cool. Yeah. And so that's what mid-level, what else does mid-level struggle with? Or is that really pretty much it? The head hopping, and then the show don't tell, or they're telling too much and not showing enough?
I would say that's the main things I see there. And then if you're looking at between mid-level and what I would consider experienced authors who they've been studying the craft for a long time. They write for, they have multi-books done, whether they're published or not. They've gone through this whole experience. The main issue that I work with those authors on is going to be setting up the conflict and making sure that it's strong enough to sustain the story. Like, this has to be whatever they're going for, whatever the character goal is, and whatever is stopping them from that has to be strong enough for me to fight through this whole story with them. And by fighting through the story, I don't mean like fighting through bad writing or anything like that. I mean like fighting through the situation, because I'm going along with them for this ride.
Yeah.
And so there's times where I end up having conversations about, okay, but why does this matter? Like, if you like, take a situation,
because it
right,
does.
yes, because that's what I want to write the story about. But if you take a situation, for example, using the tropes of best friend or older brother's best friend, if you want to look at romance,
yeah, very common.
That this is my older brother's best friend and I'm in love with him, but we can't, do anything because of my older brother. Because why? Like, you're grown-ups. Why does it matter? What is your older brother going to do? Like, does he really care if you do something with this guy?
Yeah.
And so there needs to be a step past that. And what I work with my experienced authors is finding the step back past that. I can't do this with him because he's my older brother's best friend. And when, my older brother messed around with my best friend in high school, we made a vow that we would never do that to each other. And my older brother is going through a divorce right now, and it would just devastate him. And he needs his friend more than I need him. There's got to be a next step to it. There's got to be those stakes of what are they going to lose and why does it matter at all?
But man, Dawn, that's going like several steps deep.
Because, well, life is several steps deep. I mean,
well, because I was with you. I was like, well, because they can't be together, because it's, the brother, and you're like, yeah. It has to be way more. But I like how you layer it in. It's like the pack, and then he's going through a divorce, and now's not the time. And, you just layer it on.
Well, and you also look at, is the character working towards their goal? Are they facing a threat or a promise? And so if you shift it, and this could kind of go with the older brother's best friend, but it's another way to look at it. If you shift it where this character has to get this promotion at work. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what happens if they don't? Well,
which is a common theme in some of these books.
Yes, and the answer is, well, they don't get more money. Okay. So
I love your face. You're like,
if they're at a job where they are secure, and I mean, don't get me wrong, getting more money is awesome. Yes, that is a great goal. And in real life, we go for stuff like that all the time.
Right.
But there's another level to it of, okay, I want this promotion because I need the more money, because I have a kid going to college, and if I don't get this extra promotion, they're not going to be able to go to London to study abroad for a year like I've promised them since they were 6. So that's the promise of, if I can do this, this, and this, I get the reward. So that's your promise. On the other side of that is where you have the threat. And the threat is, I want the promotion so I can get more money. If I don't get it, then this other guy is going to get it. He's going to immediately fire me because I ate his muffin out of the fridge, whatever. So you balance out that conflict with both of those so that you really can identify, because life is complicated, multi-step complicated. And so you can identify with the characters more. It gives them more to work with. Mm-hmm. And it creates more tension, and tension is what's going to keep your readers like, okay, I got to keep, it's 3 a.m, but I got to know if she gets a promotion or not. So that's what keeps them going. Okay,
that is fascinating, because you make it seem so easy, but as a writer or an author, it's not.
It is not easy.
No. It's like, staring at the ceiling, because you just don't know the multi-layers of why.
Right. And that's where I work with a lot of authors, where I do my brainstorming sessions, to where I may have an author that I know they can write. I know I could hand them any prompt and they could create a story, but they have specific goals of, I want to create a very angsty story, or I want to create a really fun rom-com.
Yeah.
And so we work from there to zero in on, okay, so what could your stakes be? And how could we make it worse? And authors hear that all the time, of the whole, put your character up in a tree and throw rocks at them. Well, you've got to figure out what your rocks look like. Because what may be a rock to this other character, somebody else might be like, yeah, that's fine, I don't care. Hit me with that. I've been hit with that 50 times, but don't hit me with this. Yeah. And so when I read, I'm very plot driven. I love mysteries and thrillers and plot, but I also want to get into that character and know what part is really going to push their buttons and what part isn't. And that's something that authors, when they're working on their stories, if you can zero in on that, that gives you, what situation to put them in. So if you have a character who, almost drowned when they were 6 and they are terrified of water, well, we absolutely have to put them on a boat.
We got to put them back in water.
They've got to be on a boat. There's got to be waves going everywhere. Because otherwise, why do you mention that part to me?
Yeah, because then that would be something you would leave on the editing room floor, so to speak. How do you know, though, if you had said it could be a promise or a threat? Is it always one or the other, or is it both? In most cases, you want both. You want them to be, they're going to lose something if they don't succeed. Is it going to be both the promise and the threat for the same character? Or does if you have 2 main characters, and maybe you have a villain and a protagonist, or 2 love interests, that kind of thing in romance, does one get the promise and one get the threat? Because I'm thinking back in your example, if I don't get the promotion and he does, he makes my life miserable, where would the promise be in that? But if I do get the promotion, then my kid can go to London and study. I get the promise in that, but how do you, in that same storyline, is it the same person who gets the promise and the threat? Because you have this character who is working at this job, they have a child, they need to put them through college, if they want to go to London, whatever. And they also have a coworker who they don't want to be answering to. And so you set up both, you've got both storylines going there, which makes them, more determined to get the promotion to go to help the kid. But also you've got this, not only are we not going to be able to send you to London if I don't get this promotion, I'm going to get fired. And then then those are extra rocks at the person in the tree. Right. Okay. Yeah, and if you're writing a romance, obviously they need to fall in love with the person they don't want to work for, and that's a whole other story. But these developers being a big trouble. Yes. Although being in corporate America for 30 years, there was no one I ever wanted to follow. Well, that's why it's fiction. That's why it's fiction. But I do say, when I have really horrible people that I need to write, I'm like, who should it be from my corporate America past? Yes. Yeah. I don't want to say who it was, but when I was writing, there was a particular person in a situation that I was in real life, in a situation in the school that I was in, that I did not feel like I was treated respectfully. And so I may have wrote that person into the story as a prostitute and had them murdered. It's possible. That story's never been published. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. The person had a very common name, and so I didn't even bother changing their name because it was a very, very common name. Okay, so if this is the confession booth, let me drop mine. I just completed a little spicy meet cute for a new series, and I needed a villain, and it's literally the same name as the person who was my villain most recently in corporate America. But the dude is not going to read romance books. I'm right. And then if my old coworkers, some of them do read one, and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, she wrote about him." Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, if this book was to ever be published and people who were working with me at that time read it, they would know exactly who that person was and why what happened to them happened to them. It's quite cathartic, I guess, if that's the right word.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite harmless. I'm not threatening anybody. I just happen to have a character with the same name.
Oh, I know. Mine is embezzling and he's about to go to jail.
There you go. Perfect.
I know.
Now, I do have to
vindication.
One of my warnings that I feel like I have to throw out there as an editor and a story coach is you have to be careful with that if you are using famous people. Like there's I've had one client who was using the name of someone who's very well known in indie publishing, and I was like, no, you have to change their name. And then I've had to deal, and this is again going back to the newbie authors, I've had a couple of newbie authors who were using like famous movie stars, and I'm like, no, we can't.
Like Brad Pitt, and they're like, I'm yes. Brad Pitt too, me too.
Yeah. Well, they were writing books that were set in that world, and so like if you show that you know, oh, I met Brad Pitt at a party and he was snorting coke. No, we're not doing that. We are not. No, please do not put my name on this. I do not want to be included in the lawsuit.
I love
just saying.
I love that. So there are some hard no's, and that kind of it dives into, do you read everything? Will you work with everything, or do you have boundaries? You know, content warnings, trigger warnings, or there's some stuff you're like, I cannot work on.
That sounds really good. I don't have a lot of boundaries. I will read dark romance. It doesn't bother me. I am a big fat chicken, so I do not do anything that is actually horror.
Yeah, where it could be like real life.
No, don't. I'm not doing true crime. I will watch true crime, but I cannot read about it. It's really hard to edit with your fingers over your eyes, so no. So I don't do anything. I don't do that. I won't do children's books, just because children's books are a very specific type of genre, and I don't have that expertise in there. So my main areas are mystery, thriller, fantasy, and romance. And there's been a couple of times with romance that it wasn't even so much that it was a trigger for me, but part of what I do as a developmental editor is point out, this could be a trigger for your readers. This is something you need to be sure that you're aware of, or also point out, especially with romance, you have to be careful. There's a very fine line between an alpha and a police report. And so you have to be very careful of, is this guy being alpha male and he's, you know, pursuing this woman because, or should she be filing a restraining order?
Oh,
and
yeah.
The way you determine that is you do what I call the best friend test. If I took this situation that just happened with this guy and I told my best friend about it, so she's not my head, she doesn't know, because you see that in romance of, well, and we're in the heroine's head, we know she thinks this is hot and she thinks he's attractive and this is okay, but she's not giving the outward signs of that. So if I was going and telling my best friend, hey, I was at work and this guy cornered me in the copy room and told me that he liked the way my skirt looked, is she going to be like, oh, is that cool? Are y'all going out later? Or is she going to be like, did you tell HR? You know?
Exactly.
So now, of course, I also do edit dark romance, and sometimes in dark romance, okay, that doesn't matter. But if you're doing contemporary, or if you're doing like a mystery that has a love story going on in it, you've got to be aware of those things. And so I point out those things to my authors. Also, I will point out, of course, I point out like plot holes, like, so how did they get to this island? Like, I don't know how we got here. Or I will point out things that they may not think of. Like, for example, I had an author that I talked to recently that she had a scene where the hero is talking to a friend of his who is married, and it made a comment that the married friend was watching these three attractive women walk by.
Gross.
And I was like, I don't think you mean, and when we looked at it, she was like, oh, no, I mean, like the women walk by, and no, he's not, because this married friend is a character from a previous book, and so like we know like he is wild about his wife. This is a whole like you need to get yourself together and admit that you have feelings for this woman moment. And so I point out things like that when you're in it as the author, you see the world in one way, and you see these characters you've created in a certain way, and then when somebody's looking from it from the outside, I try to be sure that they're aware of anything that a reader might take in a different context.
Well, and I know that you said kind of one of the no-nos in romance is cheating. Like very few people will want to read that.
Yes. And it depends on, there are some, like I said, some subgenres of romance where that's acceptable. And there's some subgenres, like I love mafia romance.
Yeah.
And so there's some parts of that where you may see that at the beginning, but as soon as he, finds his woman, then we're not going to see him having sex with somebody else.
Yeah.
And so in contemporary romance, cheating is almost never, you might see it in women's fiction, but not in romance at all.
So that is so interesting, because you would think it's off the table all across the board. You're saying even like some of the subgenres to get specific. And I think authors do need help to know, because sometimes we just don't know what genre our book is in, unless it's obvious mafia romance,
Right. And it depends on what, like there's certain conventions for each subgenre that is expected, but overall in just romance in general, cheating between, after they meet their love interest, that is their person. And there may be implications that they cheat. Like you may have the whole like, well, he met with this woman at a hotel and there's pictures of them coming out, so clearly he's cheating on me. And then you find out later, oh no, that was just a business meeting or whatever. And that's okay. And I should correct, because I said sometimes you will see cheating in women's fiction. When you see it in that, that's because women's fiction is about the woman's journey. And so, so if you see the cheating happening there, it is not, that guy's not going to end up with her at the end, usually, unless that's something they're getting past.
Okay, because I know in my debut novel that you helped me do my dev editing, you're like, if he can't, in there he gets married, and you're like, that's not going to work. And I'm like, of course it will, because he's a Mexican cartel kingpin. He can do whatever he wants.
And he can. But I'm just saying there's certain expectations that, and where you worry about that, because you do have authors, and you were never like this, but you do have the authors who are like, well, my book is going to be completely different. And that's fine. Your book can be different. You need to be prepared for that to come up in your reviews. Because if you are marketing it as a romance, those readers are going to put that on Goodreads of, FYI, there's cheating, or there's I forget how they phrase, like other woman drama is how they phrase it sometimes. And so, I mean, you can give it a shot, and if it fits your story, but if you're marketing it as a romance, there are certain things that those readers are expecting. And it's just like if you market something as a mystery, I want a problem, I want clues, and I want it solved at the end. And it's the same thing with a romance of, I've got these two people, they're going to have problems, but I know at the end they're going to end up together. That's the rule.
Yeah.
And so if they can't die, they can't randomly end up with other people. So you've just got to be aware of those, because those are the things that are going to come up in your reviews, which can make or break your book.
Well,
as
yeah,
far as
and
people want to read it.
yeah, having story conventions, or I guess you said genre conventions.
Yeah, expectations, yes.
Expectations. Well, how do you work with authors though? Because it seems like this is very collaborative, lots of back and forth. So how does that work if you get a new author? New
So I
to
work with
you, not brand new, but just a new client.
I work with authors three different
Okay.
ways. So I have three different kind of services I offer. One is brainstorming, a story consultation, or what I call code red calls. And code red calls are I'm stuck. I'm stuck. I can't go any further. Help me. And those are scheduled as needed. The author hops on my calendar and I say, okay, tell me about your story. And they say, this is everything that's happening. And we work through, here's where I think your problem is. Here's how I think you can get to the next step. The issue is with your character, or the issue is that the plot twist here doesn't match up to this plot before.
Mm-hmm.
Those calls, generally, I don't read pages unless they want to send me like a quick synopsis, or can you read the first 3 chapters, something like that. So the next level that I do for that is you have completed your whole manuscript.
Yeah.
You send me all however many pages of it at one time, and I do either a manuscript review or a developmental edit. The developmental edit has a little bit more detailed sentence level feedback. Manuscript review is more focused on the story and the characters. And I read the entire thing, sometimes more than once.
Wow.
Read the entire thing and make notes about, okay, in chapter 4, you said this character was 23. In chapter 5, they are now 37. What happened? Or things like, okay, your character is a strong, independent woman who is running her own business.
Mm-hmm.
Why does she freak out when she has a flat tire and suddenly need this guy who is the only person who can save her, and she's suddenly acting helpless? So we look at...
Ooh, that's a good one, because we're trying to tell the story, but you're right, we go like off character.
Yes.
Unintended.
So I'm looking for character inconsistencies. I look at plotting, pacing, author voice, character voice, all of those kind of things. And you get all of that feedback at one time. I send my summary letters are usually anywhere from 5 to, I have sent one that was 29 pages long. Tons of comments in the actual manuscript if you're doing a full dev edit. And then we have a follow-up call that we talk through. Okay, how are you going to revise this? All right, so this is the problem I found here. Do you need some suggestions on how to fix that? And one thing that I do, and this is a teacher in me, this is not necessarily every dev editor is not going to do this. One thing that I do is, if I give you a problem, I'm going to give you a suggestion on how to fix it.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing, because we don't know, right? You can't see the forest through the trees. You get the feedback from your editor and you're like, I don't know how to fix this. That's amazing.
And so I try, well, and I worry sometimes with some of my authors, because I'm like, okay, this may be a huge plot hole, but you can fix it with 4 sentences in chapter 5. Like, you just need to say, hey, my dad died when I was 6 in a cave. I can't go in that cave. And then we're good, you know?
And see, we don't see it as simple as that. So sometimes when, you know, it's like, yeah, when you hit a plot hole, it's just like we are that person who can't change the tire.
Right.
Because we're like,
Well, and I have had to have the difficult conversation of, this hero doesn't work at all.
Really?
Like, this hero, yes, I've had the conversation. And that usually comes up more in story coaching, which is my favorite, actually. And that's where we collaborate through the whole story. And I've had with actually a couple of authors to where we're 10 or 15,000 words in, and the author is struggling and struggling and struggling. It's like, okay, no, we need to take a step back, and we need to look at this big picture wise and see, you know. And one situation in particular that's coming to mind, the hero was not the right person for the heroine. Like, the way she had set him up, in romance, they have to complete each other, and they have to be able to give something to the other person that nobody else in the world could,
Yeah.
emotionally. And that wasn't coming across. And so we flipped some things around, and the book did really well. So I don't mind having the difficult conversations when they need to be had.
Yeah.
But in general, I want to stick to your voice and your vision for the story as much as possible, and don't try to revise it so much that it doesn't look like what you wanted it to when you started out.
Well, and I think that's important, because I know I've heard some of the authors say, hey, I work with a lot of times copy line editors, and they'll be like, they rewrote sections of my story. And although I haven't had that experience, I was like, how does that happen? How does that even work?
So I will make suggestions on, hey, you might need to rephrase this. Here are some ways you could rephrase it.
Yeah.
Or I will make suggestions of this paragraph down here that tells us we're in a coffee shop and she's sitting next to this guy on a laptop and that's who she's talking to, would go really well at the beginning of the chapter, not 4 pages in, so we know where we're at when they're having this conversation. But as far as rewriting entire sections or rewriting entire paragraphs, I know some copy and line editors do that to streamline language or grammar rules. I am not the person you want talking to you about grammar rules or punctuation. I put a comma for every word. Does not matter to me. I am story and character focused. But my goal is always to make it's still your story. And one of the things I always tell my new authors when I first start off with them, my authors that I've had for several years now, they know this, is I'm like, I taught high school for a really long time. You aren't going to hurt my feelings. If you look at me and tell me absolutely not, I do not want my character to do that, that's fine. I've got like 7 other ideas for what your character could do. So you should have that kind of open relationship with your editor, and you should feel comfortable asking them questions about, okay, so why did you change this?
Yeah.
And, if the answer is, well, I changed it because this sentence structure in English is incorrect, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But if the answer is, I changed it because that's how I would write it, then that's a whole other conversation.
Well, and I think that's a good distinction to make, because, you do have to have a good fit on your team. And sometimes you can run across vendors and you're like, we are not. Like, we're going to have to break up because we are not a good fit. And you want someone, authors, to me, we already are insecure. We already think we have imposter syndrome. You release the book and the sales aren't there. You release a book at the same time another author, and they have all these glowing reviews and page reads, and you're just like, what happened?
Right.
And so we are insecure. So to have someone who's helping you and also cheerleading, I think it's crucial. Someone that believes in your body of work.
I think it's funny you use the cheerleading, because a friend of mine, I'm actually in the dedication to her book, of her book, and it literally says, to Dawn, my bossy cheerleader. So I try to hit the balance of both of those.
Yeah.
And one of the aspects of story coaching that I do is accountability. Yeah. And yes, you can do this, and you need to sit down today and write, and I am waiting for your pages. You said you were sending me pages on Thursday. When am I going to get them? And so if you've seen the movie The Lost City with Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum.
Hot pink sequins jumpsuits.
Yes. I can identify with the publicist in that story, like on a spiritual level, because I went and saw it in the movies and was actually like snort laughing, because the publicist is like, there's no pressure. Okay, there's a little bit of pressure. There's just the right amount of pressure for you to get your book done. And that's my goal. That is like my lifetime goal there, is just, I don't want to freak you out. I don't want to trigger the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
But I also taught high school, so I'm not going to let you slide. That's how these things work.
But I think that's excellent, because, we can do that. Maybe you don't have a good writing session, or maybe, you get busy with the kids or life happens, or, we can make up a thousand reasons why not to get words on paper. And then,
yes,
we can't send you a blank page, so it makes sense.
Well, and one of my other themes is don't stay stuck. If you aren't getting the words on the paper, there's a reason for that. And it may be that, okay, I had one kid that had dance and I had another kid that had softball, and then this other kid, needs an art project, and there was no time, literally. And if that's the issue, then we talk about other ways for you to get that accomplished. Which I should say, whenever I sit down with authors and we're setting out goals for story coaching, or they're going to start a new story, but I'm going to get it as a dev edit. I'm like, okay, but realistically, like right now, the conversation I'm having with a lot of authors is, okay, you realize it's about to be the holidays.
Yeah.
Like, I know you think you're going to finish this book by January 1st, but realistically, what's your world like for Halloween? What's your world like for Thanksgiving? What's your world like for all the winter holidays in there? What kind of obligations do you have? That kind of thing. And so you've got to have those conversations. But if it's not a life issue, if it is every time, I have an hour every day that my family respects, I go in my office, I shut my door, I'm staring at my computer, and the words aren't coming out, then we need to talk about it something else. We need to talk about, is it the plot that's bothering you? Is there something about the characters that isn't clicking? Do you not know where you're going next? Or have you laid out where you're going next, but it doesn't feel like the right direction? Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have laid out this whole story and you get halfway through it and your authors are like, left turn, and we're suddenly over here. But we've got to evaluate, is this an avoidance? Is this a story problem? Or is this a life is taking over your brain?
And that's true, because we can write ourselves into a hole. And so then you're just like, do I go one scene back, two scenes? Like, you don't even know how you detoured off the path to end in the hole.
Right. Well, and that's why I started offering code red calls, because that's why I was like, it's a Dawn, I'm stuck. And a lot of times I don't need to read it. Or if it's a story that we've been working on and I know I'm going to dev edit, or if it's a series that we've been working on and I already know the world, then we can hop in. But even if it's a story I'm not familiar with at all, a lot of times I can sit with an author and they can tell me this, and this. And when I start saying, okay, but what happened here and how did we end up there? It makes them pull back. And as they're processing it out, we start to see, oh, you are absolutely, I'm not there yet. Like I'm not at the point where he's going to find the body yet. I still need him to go do this, and this.
Clever.
So, and it's always one of my favorite parts is when I see that moment where I can see an author think, oh, I've got this now.
Yeah.
Like I know where we're going from here.
I'm back on track. But that is really cool. So you have you said a red light.
Code red is what I call it. Code red.
Code red, which is really like ad hoc. You have the manuscript reviews and / dev edit, which you did say are two kind of separate services, because one, the dev edit's more in depth. And the third is story coaching or brainstorming. And that's where people say, hey, I'm coming to you. I'm writing a book.
Yes.
And then you start with, if it's romance tropes, or if it's mysteries, or if it's, within the next book in the series. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can do that. I have started with clients that we've story coached like 7 or 8 books or whatever. I have clients who will look at me and be like, okay, we're writing a book and these are the names of the characters. And I'm like, can I buy a genre? I mean, like, a genre, a trope, anything else other than you like these names. And we build the story from there.
I laugh, but that is really impressive, Dawn, because I would imagine that there are some development editors that are like, no, come back. And when you have
and that's the difference between being just a dev editor and being a story coach.
Yeah.
Because a lot of dev I work with words. It's fine. Not all developmental editors want to go through the process of story coaching. They would rather, their focus is the editing part and seeing what you've done when you've got it completed. My goal in story coaching is to set it up so that you don't take a wrong turn in chapter 4 that means you have to rewrite 15 chapters when you get the edits back. That's
all of us sad, super sad.
And I do also with story coaching, I have several clients that have brought me completed work. And they're like, there's a problem. I don't know what the problem is. And it can be very overwhelming to be handed back a 15-page summary letter. And you're like, well, there's all the problems. I'm going to go be an accountant now, And so one of the things I do in story coaching is also revisions we break it down into manageable chunks. Yeah. I will read the whole thing to start off with, and then I will say, okay, your problem happened in chapter 4. So we're going to go through this revision here, turn the way we need to turn in chapter 4, and then I will walk you through what you get to keep and what you need to revise and get you back to the end on that as well.
Wow. So, okay, if we're talking about that approach, which I think is fascinating, if we rewrite 4, do they send it back to you? Because then that changes the whole trajectory of the story.
Right.
And sometimes when you've written it as an author and you only see it like one way, and then someone comes along and says, hey, you need to make all these changes. You can't figure out the way to go. And so after you write page 4, then you guys have a follow-up conversation about where do we go from here.
Right. And then we have periodic check-ins, and I can, one of my clients who has an amazing book coming out in a couple of months, we got stuck on chapter 7, and chapter 7 was not working, and she'd written it, and she's an excellent writer. She'd written it, and I was like, okay, something's not clicking. And she's like, I know. And so we had to work through, okay, what if this is what happens here? And so she wrote that, and it worked better, but we really needed it in the other character's point of view. And so then, she wrote it again, and tons of respect to her for sticking that out.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because it's going to be amazing. It's an excellent book, but being willing to work through the process like that and being willing to see that, okay, that first fix didn't work. Yeah. Now, that is, I won't say that's rare. That is not common. Normally, we can talk about it, we revise it.
Yeah, because that's daunting.
Yes. No, I'm not saying that you're going to have to redo things 3 or 4 times. But we talk about it, we revise it, I read it over again, and I'm like, yeah, you're good, let's go.
Yeah.
And so, because my goal during our session when we're talking about those revisions is to have it set up so that you don't need to do that again. That when you work through it again, I might be like, okay, you might rephrase like this sentence, and his car is actually green, not purple, but we're fine. We can move on to the next part. So it's an accountability thing, and it's a support thing to know that when you get stuck, there's somebody you can email, you can hop on my calendar, we can have a conversation. And I think it's great for authors. You need your critique partners, and you need your writing groups, and you need your beta readers. But what I hear over and over is, well, I don't want to bother them. And like, I don't want to, whenever they're getting into the deeper edits or needing to go over pages more than one time, I don't want to bother them. I'm like, bother me. That's why you have me. That's why I'm here. I will go over it with you again. It is absolutely fine.
That's smart, because I know I've had some readers reach out and they want to be betas. They want to be in on the ground level and, help the author craft. And they have no ambitions of ever being a writer or anything beyond a reader and maybe like a bookstagrammer. They're like, I don't want to do what you do.
Right.
I don't want to craft it.
Well, and I have to give my advice about my unsolicited beta reader advice.
Oh, go.
My advice about beta readers, if you have those people, they are amazing. Yes, keep them, give them chocolate, reward them for being in your life. My suggestion, especially for new authors with beta readers, is to stagger your feedback with them. Mm-hmm. So if you have 5 people who are willing to read your book and give you feedback, you send it to 2. When you get their feedback, you pick and choose what resonates with you. You make those adjustments. Then you send it to 3 and 4 who have never seen the original version. So they have no bias. See what they say. And then you send it to the 5th one as, this is what it's been all along. Because what I see happen with new authors is they have 5 people who are willing to read their book, and they're so excited somebody's going to read their book, and they send it off to them, and then they get 5 different types of feedback, and they're like, I don't know which of these to trust. And this person said they love my heroine, this person said they hated my heroine, this person said my heroine should be a penguin. I don't know what to do with this. And so you've got to, my suggestion is always to stagger it so that you're not trying to process that all at one time.
No, I think it's a great piece of advice, because I was talking to an author, and she was the debut on, Let's Go Live here, and she had 10 beta readers. And I was like,
oh my goodness.
I said, wow. You actually, and she sent them, she was so organized, bless her heart, had questions, she had done her homework on these betas and was just like on top of it, organized. And I said, when all that feedback came back, like, what did you think? And how'd you, she's like, I cried.
Yes.
I would imagine, because it is overwhelming. And when one person says, hey, when they all come up with like a similar feedback, maybe the guy, you don't like him or whatever, that's one thing. Or I had on one of mine, it's a little dog, and I had put, I've never owned a corgi, no, it was a little dog, but I said its ears had like brush, and she's like, no, the ears don't move. They're like always up, and so they can't flop. And so that was constructive, because her whole family had this particular breed. She grew up with them. But then, other ones, it was all scattered. Love him, hate him, you're just like,
Well, and I have a list of questions for my authors to use with beta readers. Nice. And you want to ask very specific questions.
Yeah.
So you don't want to ask, did you like the hero?
Yeah.
You want to ask, what did you like about the hero? What did you not like about the hero? Where do you feel that the hero acted out of character? Is there anywhere you were concerned about the hero's actions or whatever?
Those are good.
Because you want to be, depending on who the beta readers are that you're bringing in, if these are people who love you or sleep with you or have to sit across from you at the Thanksgiving dinner table, they're going to maybe color their feedback a little bit of, yes, I adored him, he was fabulous. And so asking those more specific questions can help you get more constructive feedback out of it.
Yeah. No one in my family wants to read my book, so I don't personally have that problem. Although my friend is a single guy, and he's a tech guru, and he travels all the time to Taiwan, or sometimes he travels to China. He's like, do you have any book for me to read on my flight over there? I'm like, you're not my target audience.
But he's willing to read it, and that's awesome. So
he has all these like nerd manuals, because he's a computer engineer and something else. Because he's a computer whiz, right? Like,
right.
Yes, and so he's like, I have all my, manuals, and I have your romance.
Aww.
I thought that was cute.
That's a good friend. You should keep him.
He's so funny. But it's true, that when you have people that love your work, when I had some betas, I was like, okay, they would cheerlead you. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to move you to my street team, because you're my hype girl, and you're not constructive criticism.
Right. And you need a good balance of both of those.
Oh yeah, because you would quit as a writer if you didn't have your hype girls.
Right. Yes. You absolutely need somebody who is like, no, you are absolutely amazing. This is fun.
Do this. Keep going.
And one of the things I've talked with some of my clients before is when I do send the feedback, I've had a client literally tell me like, I need 2 or 3 days to be mad at you, and then we can talk about the feedback. And I'm like,
I love it.
that's fine.
That
I'm good
is
with
so
the honesty.
honest.
And so you need the person who, like my poor husband, back when I was writing, I had sent some stuff off to some critique partners, and he comes home and I'm scrubbing things, and he's like, oh, well, this is okay, bad day, all right. And I'm like, so they said this and this and this and this and this, and he's like, okay, so we're mad at them. And I'm like, no, we're not mad at them. No, we're not mad at them. No. So you think they're wrong? And I'm like, no, they're right. And he's like, I don't understand why you're scrubbing the baseboards then. But you need
I don't
that
understand
person.
what we're feeling. What are we feeling?
Yes, yeah. If you will tell me the script, I will follow it. But you need the person who is going to be like, what is that editor saying? You don't need to change that character. And then later when you're like, okay, I really do need to change. Yes, you need to change that character. She is exactly right. So it's important to have a good balance of both, because this is a hard career. It's a tough industry, and it starts to feel very personal because you are putting out basically your dreams and your imagination and your fantasy. It's not like you created a blanket and people can take it or leave it. This is my whole imaginary world, and you're being mean. And so you need both sides of that.
Well, don't you think too, there's kind of misconceptions as to what, story coaching is and what developmental editing is?
I get questions about editing all the time from people who don't realize what I do, especially developmental editing, where they will be, like I said, I'm not the person who needs to tell you if that semicolon goes there. It looks pretty. You can keep it. I don't know. And the other side of it that I see with story coaching is I'm a story coach. I am not a ghostwriter. And so I'm not going to write your story for you. And I have been approached by people with good intentions who were like, I have this story. I don't feel, competent enough to write it. I don't have the time to write it. Writing is not my skill. Do you want to write it? No, I do not. I do not want to write it. Thank you. I will help you through it, but I do not want to write it.
I never thought about ghostwriting. I know that I have two in my author group. They're really fantastic ladies, but one of them, she is a ghostwriter, and she does 7,000 words a day for her clients.
That is amazing. Good for her.
I know, 5 days a week. And so I'm just like, how in the world does your brain, and so she has repeat customers. And in fact, she said that she has one author who has actually never written anything herself. Mm-hmm. And, she just does all the ghostwriting. And I'm just like, I marvel, because I feel like ghostwriters don't get enough credit.
Right. And that's part of the whole of being a ghostwriter. Yeah. That's just not something I would be interested in. I know people who do it, and they're amazing, and that's great for them. But that's some of the misconception I see with story coaching is sometimes I'm like, no, I'm here to guide you through your story. And I ask a lot of questions to help you guide through the story. So I will ask like, okay, so do you think your heroine would do this or this? Well, she would do this. Okay, why? And rather than me saying,
we don't know why. You tell us why. You tell us why.
And so when you get to tell me why, I will be like, okay, well, maybe this, or maybe this, or maybe this. But as a story coach, I try not to be like, okay, she's going to do this because this happened because of this.
Yeah.
So, because it's still your story.
Well, and I mean, to new authors, I think I can see how they get confused. I can see how there's a misconception.
Right.
Because you think it's so easy, and then you sit down to write and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much harder. And everybody wants to write a book. It's on everyone's bucket list. And so it's those that are like the novice writers, and then those that are like trying to make it into a career.
Right.
And your craft is incredibly hard work.
Well, and it depends on what your goal is.
Learned it like years ago, decades ago. We all learned it in that class in high school that you really didn't pay attention to, and you're just like counting down the hours because my boyfriend's out in the hallway, and, or I have campus lunch, and English stands between me and going out to my car and going to get McDonald's or something. You know what I mean? That's when we learn storycraft.
Well, and it's changed because I joined my first writing group over a decade ago. And the things that were expected then, and if you look at books that were written even just like in the 80s or mid 90s, the style of them is different. And some of the expectations are different.
Can you give us an example? That's fascinating.
If you look at like Agatha Christie novels or Rebecca, which is held up as like the first romantic suspense.
Yep, everyone's read it.
So many descriptions of flowers, like so many descriptions of flowers in Rebecca. I kept waiting for them to poison somebody with a flower. I kept waiting.
What's the significance of these flowers?
Yeah, why are you telling me about the flowers? And it's because then people would get completely lost in a book and completely lost in the descriptions and getting carried away. And now the expectation is, if you're writing a mystery or you're writing a thriller, like, you've got us in there and we know that there's a problem and let's start solving some things. And so the craft has changed, not like dramatically, but there are conventions that have changed. And then when you look at things like certain tropes, or if you look at, especially in romance, I can remember reading my grandmother's Harlequins, and every single one of them, which we won't talk about the fact I shouldn't have been reading Harlequins at that age, but every single one of them, like, the guy would grab the girl and kiss her until she stopped resisting. Again,
yeah, we don't do that.
Are you an alpha, or do we need a police report?
Unless
which way are we going here?
Dance, okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
alpha.
Those expectations have changed sometimes. And so even though something you learned as part of the craft when we were all back in high school, which was just a few years ago, I mean, exactly.
Sure.
Right. Just a couple. But even those kind of things are different now. And you have to, my suggestion on that is to read a lot.
Yeah.
And you need to read things that are current, and read at least somewhere near the genre you want to write in. And some of my authors will be like, I can't read while I'm writing because I don't want to copy anything. I don't want to be influenced by that. And that's very legit.
Yeah.
But if you decide you're going to write a romance, because it's super easy to tell the story of people falling in love, and you haven't read a romance in the past 15 years, you need to take a minute and do that, so that you see how the stories are being put together now. You see what the expectations are.
Well, and also writing style. Some are, short sentences, some are lengthy, some are very descriptive, some are very short. Like you said, all of a sudden we're on a boat and you're like, did I miss it?
Right. How did we get here?
Some are very thin on description. I like a more heavy dialogue book, because I don't want to read pages of description and narrative, and like you said, weave in that backstory somehow, but it doesn't have to be. But I feel like some people still do these massive descriptions and you're like, okay.
Well, and again, that's where you know what your reader wants.
Yeah.
And so if I'm reading a cozy mystery, I know that I'm going to get a description of the bookstore that they own. I'm going to get a description of the cat that's walking through, because that's
so cute. That's true, though.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it is, and that's why we read those. On the other side of that, if I'm reading a fast-paced thriller, I don't really care what the bookstore looks like. I want to know where the blood is. And so that's why I would say at least read something in the genre that you're looking at, and look at what authors do you want to be like, because there's a big difference. There's a big difference between a author who does do all the backstory and does do a 500-page, it's a mystery and you're in it the whole time, but they're describing everything you've ever seen in your life in this book.
Yeah.
and the author who's doing the quick hit thriller that it's 75,000 words and you can read it in an afternoon if you sit down, and it's those quick sentences and fast paced, and maybe there's not quite as deep character reflection going on, but you're still drawn into those characters. And so look at, who do I enjoy reading and who do I want to write like? And it's okay for you to enjoy, like, I read everything from cozy mysteries to some super dark kind of questionable romance stuff. It's okay for you to have that stretch. But when you're going into, okay, I want to write a cozy or I want to write a fantasy, look at who is doing the kind of story you would like to do. It's also a really good way to find an editor, by the way, is if you are indie publishing and you are looking at these books that you enjoy, look and see who edited them, because they're going to know the style that you're looking for.
Oh, that's so smart, because I know that finding good team members is a challenge for indies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so look in the acknowledgments. The editors don't always show up on like the copyright page. But a lot of times if you look in the acknowledgments, they will mention who they used, and that gives you a place to start when you're looking for an editor.
That's a great suggestion though, both, like read what you like and then emulate that writing style if that's what, because I feel like, it's hard for authors to find their voice. And I think we struggle because, you'll write the way you write and then you'll read a bunch of people and you're like, oh, I don't write that way. Is that how it's supposed to be done? And then again, you lose confidence.
Well, and the answer is there's not really that's how it's supposed to be done. Just like my accent is going to be different from somebody else's. It's okay for your writing voice to be completely different. People can still understand you and people will like what they like.
Yeah.
And so you can write an amazing story, but if it's a fantasy and you're giving it to somebody who only reads thrillers, they're not going to find your writing voice the same way that they would their favorite thriller author.
Yeah.
So it's okay when you're looking at these. I know sometimes it can get overwhelming because people are like, oh, I will never be like whoever.
Yeah, fill in the blank.
You don't have to be like them. You have to be like you.
Yeah. No, I've come across some really famous authors, and when I read their books, I'm like, there's something missing. I can't figure it out if it's the short, choppy sentences or the skimpy description, or maybe it's not deep enough point of view. Like there's a few, but they're crazy famous, crazy. Or like TikTok, they weren't famous, then all of a sudden they went TikTok famous, and their numbers were like in a whole nother stratosphere, and you're just like, why?
Yeah, the TikTok, and I am not a marketing guru by any means. That is not my area of expertise. The TikTok phenomenon fascinates me.
Yeah.
Because
they're not necessarily picking the best books.
Well, they pick parts of the book that speak to them, and that's amazing.
Yeah, that's what.
And so you get these moments on TikTok and Reels, and sometimes even like on the ads, to where there's a specific moment where the person says something, or there's some kind of interaction that you're like, yes, I am here for that. And then you're reading 300 pages and you're like, I don't know where that came from.
Oh,
right.
Where was it?
And so that kind of, if I was into marketing, I would be very interested in studying that and figuring out how that all works. Yeah. But that's one of those things, which is one of the biggest issues I see with indie authors, is discoverability. And the idea that you're just going to write this book and you're just going to put it out there and it's going to sell. I really